everyone. Welcome to our practitioner series. I'm Srinivas Kunte. I'll be moderating today's session. The topic for today is on checking if we are really AI ready. Now, what does that really mean? Can intelligence be artificial at all? Do we know enough on the AI applications that we have been using and that have made our lives better? Let us find out more. Our speaker for today is quite a famous personality now. I think he's one of the best minds I've known, with expertise not just in computing, but in investment management, actually in trading, both short-term, low latency trading and high latency trading. Parijat Garg, he is an investor, trader, and an entrepreneur with more than a decade's systematic trading experience. Parijat began his career with Tower Research Capital. Many of you may know that Tower Research are now a global leader in high-frequency algorithmic trading. Parijat maintains a concentrated equity portfolio built on long-term investing principles. He's a computer science engineer from IIT Bombay, and he's a charter holder, CFA charter holder since 2011. Parijat has been extremely supportive of the CFA Society India's activities as well as CFA Institute activities. He's a prolific volunteer. Very grateful to you, Parijat. Just before I begin and hand over the proceedings to Parijat, just give me a moment to walk through the housekeeping instructions. Many of you know this, but the webinar is about 60 minutes, including the Q&A. We'll be leaving time for Q&A after the presentation, but you can submit your questions as and when you think of a question, a good question, hopefully, which is of a conceptual, which is conceptual in nature, and submit your question by clicking on the Q&A link. Don't put it on the other chat box. There's a Q&A link at the bottom of your viewer where you can type your questions. The webinar presentation Parijat has kindly agreed, and it will be available for you, after today's session is over. And last but not least, we value your feedback. It's very important. So please do complete the evaluation survey. Not just the evaluation survey, please do write to us. I know many of you personally, so if you could give us suggestions, speaker suggestions, topic suggestions, I would be very grateful. All of us at CFA Institute will be very grateful. Now, without any further ado, over to you, Parijat. Thank you so very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Srinivas. As for being famous, I think nobody has played a greater role than yourself in making that happen. So, and it's always a pleasure to speak at these events because you push me, and that forces me to think about, organize my thoughts on any given subject. I mean, so it's been very useful to me. So I love being here. Also, welcome everyone, and thank you for logging in today. I mean, despite the massive webinar fatigue that I know everyone is feeling. I realized too late that the title of this talk is actually quite cliche, right? Are you AI ready? I mean, there's like tons of stuff like this now, and I know I wouldn't want to sign up to listen to someone drone on about how satellites images are being used by hedge funds to trade stocks and things like that. I mean, I get it, it's happening, but it's not like I'm going to start doing this for myself, and so I don't expect most of you to do that either. It's fine. I'm not going to talk about those things. I'm going to try and talk in more practical terms about how most teams can benefit from AI, and how you can start preparing for that, just using AI more effectively. And I'm using the word teams after a lot of thought, because even if it's possible for an individual to build some interesting tools with AI, if you really need to benefit from it in a process, then you need a team of people. You need people with diverse skills, and that's when you are going to get the best rewards. I also want to apologize to those who are not in buy-side roles, because even though what I'm going to say applies generally to most of finance, my examples are going to be biased to the buy side, because that's where my experience largely has been, but the principles are generally applicable. So I think that should be fine. And finally, I mean, this talk is also about analytics. It's about AI, but frankly, it's also about analytics because and those things have been around for decades now. But especially in finance, I've seen too many organizations that are not geared even to benefit fully from that. And as we'll see, if you're not ready to harness analytics, you really are not ready to do much with AI either, right? And the buy side, frankly, is quite bad, especially in analytics. So, AI is not a magic bullet, right? And definitely not a magic bullet in finance. I mean, there will be some areas of human activity where they'll be fully taken over by AI. Driving cars, for example, I don't think that day is very far. And even in finance, there are some particular activities which can be fully taken over, but not investing, for example. I don't think. I mean, even if AI could do investing, I don't think it ought to. I mean, I have reasons for that. That's for another day. But anyways, but that does not mean that we don't use AI in every possible way to make us more effective and make us more better at what we do. And the way I think about it is that the next decade is going to be an era of man plus machine dominance. I keep saying this everywhere. But actually, what happens is we forget, we don't notice. In fact, some things have become so routine, we don't notice that the world is actually already man plus machine, right? I mean, commercial planes fly most of their journeys fully, the pilots are not actually flying the plane most of the time. It's a computer flying it. Washing machines use fuzzy logic to wash your clothes. And a simpler example, right? When was the last time you did a DCF with pen and paper? I mean, so the world is already man plus machine. It's just that, and I'm not playing down the impact of AI. It's just that I don't think that, AI is going to turn us into this. I don't know how many of you recognize this. I love this movie. It's from Pixar's movie called Wall-E. Right? In the movie, humans have all left Earth because we filled the Earth with trash. And now we all live in a spaceship, and that is run by a very powerful AI system, right? And humans don't do anything. They just watch TV and they drink colas. Okay, so I don't think AI will be running our lives so that all we have to do is watch Netflix. I think instead, it's going to help us become this, right? I mean, think about what the Iron Man suit is, or rather, Jarvis, the embedded AI system. It processes external signals at superhuman speeds and accuracy and surfaces relevant information. Then when Tony Stark makes a decision, it can, it can understand what he's saying. It can cross question if required. It can propose alternatives and then execute the final decision. So basically it lets Tony focus on the critical decisions that matter. And, that's exactly how I think AI is going to become part of our lives, where, it augments what we do. It forces us to, do the harder tasks, which means that, by the way, our lives are going to get harder. If you thought our lives are going to get easier, it's not true. And that's not because we are going to be competing against AI, right? Wherever AI actually takes a foothold, we'll not be able to compete. So that's not something we're going to try. Our life is going to get harder because we'll be forced to work on the harder problems, right? Not the mechanical things that you can do without applying your mind. In that sense, we just have to move up the value chain. So, I start with a simple example of how AI is actually, even you may not have realized you're already using some of it. I mean, I don't know how many people have noticed Excel, for example, can do this. So, in the example I have here, I have a list of email addresses. That's what I started with, that I got from somewhere. Now I wanted to extract the first names from this list, right? So now, normally what is going to end up happening is you would take such a list, you would hand it over to some poor analyst or associate, and you would say, just do this. And he'll sit there and he'll fill out a sheet and, 500 names. If it's 500 names, he's going to do 500 names. It's going to be a pain. But now what will happen is, so I filled out the first name. And even as I was starting to type out the second name, Excel already figured out what I'm trying to do. It makes these suggestions. And all I have to do is press enter and, it's done. So this is a simple example. And frankly, nothing very powerful is happening here in the background. It's a very simple thing. But, I like it I like this example because of two reasons. The first is that it demonstrates how AI is most likely going to work in our lives. It's not going to be fully standalone systems built from the ground up for every organization, having their own systems. I think it's going to be, it's more going to be smarter and smarter third-party tools, and that are wired into our regular workflows. The second is that, our ability to leverage these tools depends heavily on how we design our workflows. How much information are we recording digitally for potential value add by AI systems? So if we just oversimplify this example here, if we were doing this with pen and paper, no AI tool could have helped us. It's only because this process is digital, right? It's in Excel that AI could help us. I mean, if you're thinking that, everything is digitized today, so, what the hell am I talking about? Whoever does stuff with pen and paper. So it's not just about pen and paper. You'll be surprised how much more we could be digitizing, and that could be leveraged. I'll get to that in the later part of this talk. So, but anyway, both these points are important. The fact that you have to think of, AI as being part of our workflow, showing up as little additions to our tools instead of a separate system. And even systems that we will build on our own. These are tools that will show up within our existing things. And two, we have to be capturing more and more of our work digitally. That's going to be critical if we want to use AI effectively. Right. So, I mean, we are people in finance, right? This is the one question we constantly ask ourselves and we try to answer, what's my edge? And there's no reason why you should not be asking the same question for AI, right? And to answer this question, you need to have a framework to think about it. How do you even begin to think about what, which way you can have AI add the most value to your processes or your work? So you can think of AI as being built, there are two major pillars in an AI system. One is the data that you feed the system and the tools or the algorithms that are used to process that data, right? So as we move from traditional analytics to, the more powerful AI tools, the kind of data we can process has widened dramatically. So that kind of data sets that we can use that have also, grown. And there are, opportunities to create more interesting data sets, again, like these satellite pictures that people keep talking about. But obviously there are others. And simpler things that we could do and most organizations could do. And naturally, the algorithmic possibilities themselves have gone up a lot because of the deep learning systems or the basic technique. There's a million combinations you can do there and build interesting things. So there's some possibility of finding an edge there as well. Right? So you've got interesting things you can do on the data side, and there's interesting things you can do on the algorithm side.
Parijat, sorry, just one quick question here. Many people may be having that question. I used to have it. Can you quickly, touch upon, what is deep learning, what is machine learning, what is AI? Just very, I'm sorry to interrupt, just to, if you can quickly touch upon that.
Okay, sure. So, I think, so machine learning is a very specific thing. What it simply means is that, so traditional analytics, what you would do is you would have some hard-coded rules and it could do very fancy things, but effectively the rules were fixed, right? That, if all of X, Y, Z conditions happen, then, you have a certain output or you have a certain visualization. What machine learning effectively does is that, those rules evolve based on inputs from the external environment. And external environment, I mean external to the algorithm itself. So I mean, at the broadest level, that's what machine learning is. And that could be something very simple, even say, for example, an online regression. Right? What's an online regression? You've got a bunch of inputs and you fit a regression line to it. And as you add more points, the regression line sort of keeps shifting, right? The slope can change, the intercept can change as more and more data is added. Even something like that technically is machine learning, right? So machine learning is a very, very broad concept, if you would say. I mean, there's like hundreds of different algorithms within machine learning to improve a system as it gets more and more inputs. That's machine learning. Now, within machine learning, there is a particular technique which is decades old. I think sometimes in the 60s is when neural networks were first proposed. A neural network is effectively, it's like a gradient search. I don't know. This might be too technical again. It's effectively a search algorithm for optimization, right? So you have any kind of function. It's an optimization mechanism, and it's called a neural network because it looks a lot like, you know, structured a lot like how the human brain is wired. Except that, you know, neural networks until the last decade, I think sometime in 2007, the big problem was if you built it was so powerful that it could overfit all the data, right? So anything you threw at it, it could overfit it, which means that if you showed it something new, it would not know what to do with it. It was that powerful.
I'm sorry. So I'm sorry again. So what is overfitting again?
Overfitting means that, you know, so basically you are trying to, okay, here's the thing, right? So if you're trying to understand the concept of a dog, right? And if somebody showed you a Doberman, right? And showed you 50 different Doberman dogs, you know, with different angles, you would think, you know, that is only what a dog is. And if somebody showed you a poodle, you wouldn't know that it's a dog, right? That's an overfitted model of a dog.
Perfect.
Right?
Thank you.
Right. So that's overfitting. So that was one of the problems with neural networks. If you built a deep, you know, with a lot of neurons, I mean, this is again technical, but if you had a lot of neurons, you would end up overfitting the data and you would not be prepared to understand new inputs in the environment. So deep learning effectively, and these so new techniques were developed late in the last decade, which basically overcame this problem. They were able to generalize well. The mathematics was developed that allowed rapid optimization, much faster optimization, which did not overfit the data. I guess, yeah, I think without getting too technical.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So deep learning, machine learning, deep learning, and artificial intelligence.
Yeah. So artificial intelligence is, of course, a very, very general word. Machine learning specifically means what I said. And then deep learning is one particular subset of machine learning.
Right. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. So the two inputs, data and algorithms, right? Now, there are 4 different ways you could actually put these together. Okay. So you could have third-party data, right? So third-party data is like, you know, stuff that you could get from Bloomberg or Capital IQ or things like that. Or, you know, or you could have proprietary data. So proprietary data would be things like, you know, your in-house analyst estimates or information about your own clients. This is going to be proprietary data. So those are the 2 different elements you could have in data. And we'll see more examples of what kind of proprietary data you could have. Alternatively, you know, on the tools or the algorithms, you could have third-party algorithms, third-party tools, you know, such as some that, you know, Amazon provides. And there are lots of other things as well. Or you could build your own library called TensorFlow, for example. Or this is one of the 2 very famous libraries, very popular libraries for machine learning. You could use that to build your proprietary tools. So you've got 4 combinations effectively. Are you using your proprietary data or are you using third-party data? And similarly, are you using your own proprietary tools and algorithms or are you using third-party algorithms? Right? So that's what you get, these 4 combinations. Now I'll argue 2 things. One, unless you're a big firm with the resources to build a full-fledged AI team, right? Building proprietary AI tools from scratch is very hard. Okay, it will be incredibly hard to find an edge there. So it's probably best to use third-party tools. And the second is, you know, if you use third-party tools combined with third-party data, that's just table stakes. What I mean is, you know, effectively, you will not be able to not use this. If you don't use this thing, you are basically tying your hands behind your back. You are effectively saying that I don't want to use Excel to build my financial models. So on the one, because, you know, there's nothing unique here, third-party data and third-party tools, this is accessible to everybody. And you know what happens in finance, when something is accessible to everybody, it just becomes table stakes, right? So I think the sweet spot where you can build, you know, if you're an asset management firm or a not a tech first finance firm, the best place to find your edge is if you bring proprietary data to the mix, right? And you use third-party tools to extract more alpha from it. That's where your edge is most likely going to come from, right? I mean, of course, if you are a tech-first firm, then at the right-hand edge, where you probably bring in your own data and you develop your own tools, that could be a great place to be. But I'm just assuming most people today are not that, right? So the best way to get an edge would be to use proprietary data and using third-party tools.
So, sorry, Parijat, could you give a few examples of third-party tools?
Sure. So I'm actually, yeah. So here's an example, right? So there's this service called third-party tool. Actually, so I'll break it up into two parts. There's the third-party tools with third-party data, which is, they are effectively just AI-powered services. So I came across this company called Sentio. What Sentio lets you do is, it can ask. So they look at third-party research and corporate filings, etc., and you can ask questions in natural language, and they will throw up answers to it directly, right? So now this is powered by AI. Just that as a user, you don't have to know how this AI works, etc., right? So there's third-party data, third-party tools, and this is just packaged into a service. So that, by the way, this is like I said, this is table stakes. It may be, good thing is that if you say you are using Bloomberg, right, these kind of tools will actually start appearing there on Bloomberg soon enough. And all you have to do is maybe you have to pay a little more for these modules. So effectively you are using AI, but you don't know too much about that, about the details, the nitty-gritty behind that. Srinivas, sorry, I'll just get back to, I'll talk about these third-party tools in just a minute. So, right, so amongst those three, and the third option was, you roll your own systems. This is aspirational, right? And it is exciting. And maybe, you could even replicate, you could research, read some research papers and maybe replicate some of the cutting edge work. But, the question you have to ask yourself is it your core strength, right? If you could license, for example, if you could license Google search technology for your own organization, should you be trying to build your own search engine? Probably not, right? I mean, it will be cool and all, but ultimately it will not give you the edge you are looking for. So from a business standpoint, I would recommend, most teams should not do this except as an intellectual challenge maybe, and as a mechanism to learn the internals of how these things work, right? So finally, we come to the third-party tools. Now, the way I see it, most tools will become available as APIs. What's an API? It's a application programming interface. Effectively, these are almost like black boxes that give you input and output interfaces where you can put in your data, and then they will give you the data in a form that another program can consume. So they hide the heavy lifting of AI, and they just let you, they give you these mechanisms to plug that entire tool into your workflow. So what that's going to mean is that, you'll need to design your processes so that they are pluggable, right? So your processes should be able to generate data that can be fed into a third-party service, and then they should be able to consume output from another third-party service. So you'll need developers to do this. But the good thing is that you don't need, doing this wiring is an order of magnitude easier than actually building the AI systems. So that's what I think that's what you should be doing. So Srinivas, to answer your question here now, third-party tools, for example, Amazon on the web services, it provides a service called SageMaker, right? So SageMaker effectively is a tool where, which you can provide input data, and input is basically what is known as training data in machine learning. So some examples, and then your labels of, what is the correct output. And Amazon will basically train the system on its own, right? It's a complete black box to you. Maybe you can set some parameters, but the entire mechanism is hidden away by Amazon. And then once that, that system has been trained, you can then use it to make further predictions in your own workflow. So that's what I mean by third-party tools. That's one thing. And then there are lots of libraries also. So for example, a third-party tool could be something as simple as a ready-made Python module to do what is known as k-means clustering, right? So you could write your own k-means clustering algorithm, or you could pick up a library that lets you just, in Python, specify the data and it will give you the output. That's what I really mean by third-party tools. So it could be a service, or it could be pre-built modules of Python that you could directly use in your system.
Sorry, no, that's wonderful. So just to for the benefit of everyone, can you give an example of k-means clustering?
Okay, I had one and then I removed it, but I think I'll talk about it. So let's say you have a screener, okay? So a stock screener, you want to build one for yourself. So typically what you do is you go to a website like screener.in, for example, and you'll put in some criteria. You might say a market cap criteria or something like that, and you'll get a list of stocks. And then you can keep playing with that. But let's say, on the other hand, that you took the entire BSE 500 list of companies and you start tagging some companies, and I like this company, or I don't like this company, or maybe into 4 categories. Let's say that I like this company a lot, this is an okay company, this is a terrible company, and this is something that I don't really have an opinion about. If you start tagging some of them, then based on certain characteristics. So you could say, let's say you want to figure out whether you have a bias towards certain industries or a certain market cap or a certain valuation multiple, etc. So you could put these parameters as dimensions to a k-means problem. You could give examples of, all right, so you don't even need to give examples to a k-means algorithm actually. So you could just say, I want to classify the universe of BSE 500 companies into similar companies, right? I want to know that these certain companies are very similar to each other, etc. You could do that with a k-means algorithm. I don't think that made too much sense. It's basically an automated classification system based on a number of dimensions or characteristics of any object.
Right. So what we are really doing in k-means clustering is trying to cluster things together based on a belief, and that belief is based on some known examples, and we are trying to get that give that to a set of to a data and to a data set as well as an algorithm to get back clusters. Is that right?
So actually that's the thing. So k-means really does not need examples also, really. It just needs a thoughtful selection of parameters or dimensions on which to classify things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the whole point you mentioned k-means clustering is one of the algorithms that could be wrapped into Python, and people could use that as a third-party tool.
Yes, right? Yes, that's exactly it. So if some process needs a k-means algorithm to be implemented, one way would be to actually write it out, and the odds are that you would make some mistake and you might miss some edge cases. Don't bother, get a good library and plug that in, and focus on your problem statement rather than trying to implement standard algorithms.
Yeah, a simple thing could be just variance of stocks, right? A high volatility stocks versus low volatility stocks.
Sure. Yeah. So exactly. So and so that will help you, for example, and then you might be able to do more fancy things with that in terms of being able to say, okay, this is one cluster of stocks that I like, and I will further dig down into those. Right. Things like that.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So AI actually lives on data, right? And so data is proprietary, and if you bring that proprietary data to the AI systems, that whatever systems you choose to use, right? If you bring proprietary data into the mix, that's where you will get your biggest edge. And by using these standard algorithms, you will actually be able to get more alpha out of your data, right? And that's what I'm trying to say is unique data is one of the big things that you can do which does not require rocket science, and that's going to be very powerful. And to just drive home that point, yet another movie reference, and this is a scene from a movie I really love, mostly because I love movies about geeks. So this is Good Will Hunting, and Matt Damon here is Will, and he's a genius. But most of his knowledge, so he's a maths genius, but he also knows a lot about the world. But everything that he knows about the world, he's got from books, right? And Robin Williams is a psychiatrist, and he's basically saying to him, that the most useful thing that Will can talk about is about himself. Because that's something that cannot be found in books. That's not something that anyone else has easy access to, right? And that's exactly how I think we should think about AI if you are an asset manager or a sell side firm, right? Because investing is replete with publicly available data. All your competitors have access to pretty much the same data, but what's unique is your own thinking about stocks and industries and managements, and how you think about portfolio construction, what do you think matters in the long term, right? That's something that's unique to you. And if you bring that into the mix, you get your edge. Everything else, if you use public data, is mostly table stakes, right? Or, I'll paraphrase another famous quote here. I mean, it's not the AI that you bring to the process, but the data that you bring to the AI in some sense. Okay, so enough about data being the source of edge, etc. You'll switch gears a little, right? And this statement is, AI purists are going to give me a lot of grief because of that, I know. But from an application standpoint, that is what it is. Artificial intelligence is basically analytics on steroids, because what analytics can do with structured data, the new AI tools can do with unstructured data, like images or text or voice. But before you get excited, because all of these videos, they circulate, and people seem to think that if you just throw your, say for example, throw your entire email collection at an AI system, then it will answer all your questions for you, for example. That's not how it works. That's not how it worked for analytics. That's not how it works for AI, right? The truth is that if you really want to benefit from AI or analytics, you have to know exactly what you want, right? And then you have to build carefully curated data sets. And it just takes effort. Just as much effort as it took in analytics, it's going to take with AI as well, right? You can't just take a dump of all of your data and expect that something magical is going to happen. So how do you start, right? So you need, the first steps to using AI or even for using analytics is digitization and automation. Now, I mean, you could argue, as I said before, you could argue that everything is digitized today, but I'm going to counter it with two things. One is that a lot of digitization that we are using today, it's actually done in a way that is not very useful from an AI point of view. For example, a lot of information that is exchanged, quote unquote, digitally in finance today, it's done with PDF files. I mean, these are great for human consumption, but they pretty much break the chain for any automated processing that you want to do. Right? Even Excel, which is basically quite structured, even that is abused so much that very often it's impossible to plug that into an automated workflow. So, for example, if your custodian, right, sends you your portfolio holdings every day in PDF, right, that's pretty useless from an AI point of view. If, on the other hand, if he's willing to give you your portfolios as a CSV file, right, and further, if he's willing to provide it on an FTP server, where you could write a program that automatically downloads it every day, that opens up a ton of possibilities. For example, you could build a system that flags anomalies. The system could flag positions that you have that you've not shown abnormal movements or trading volumes or something like that. So, and in high frequency, by the way, this is absolutely par for the course. But somehow in discretionary asset management, especially, I found that this can be maybe in very large firms, it's done like this, but in most firms it's quite ad hoc, right? And I'll talk about this in a bit. So that's one bit about digitization. And the other is, there are opportunities to digitize even more things. So, I mean, for example, I'm assuming that most of the team meetings that you have in your offices today, you're doing on Microsoft Teams, or maybe you're doing it on Zoom. So what you could do now is you could start recording all of them, right? and tools are becoming available that do pretty good transcription. In fact, Microsoft Teams does it on the fly. As you are talking, it does a transcription, although it doesn't let you download, sadly. But there's another service actually called Descript that I came across recently that does beautiful transcriptions, and it effectively tags your entire audio with the text. So, imagine what that lets you do. If you've had many discussions about, over time, and you've got those recordings and it's transcribed, you can effectively text search through all of that. And you can bring up, what you discussed about a specific company 3 weeks ago. It's right there, right? And this itself, this is simple, but this is extremely powerful, and that can become a big source of edge, right? So, and this was never digitized. I mean, most conversations that we've had, you've never digitized that, right? But now you can do that. And because of AI, you can actually use it very effectively. So, and when you've recorded this data effectively, you can mine it. And if you can mine it, that's a source of edge. So that's about digitization, right? Now, what are the application areas? So I think there are, 3 broad areas. This mostly applies across most things, right? There's operational support, analytical support, and there's decision support. Although to be honest, on operational support, I don't really have too many great ideas on what you can do with AI, right? I mean, I don't understand the nitty-gritty involved in operations, and so I cannot really come up with great ideas. And this is another point I will come to, towards the end of the talk. So one idea, of course, in operations could be that, you've got paper forms that you receive from clients, and maybe you can process them automatically, use OCR, etc. But, that I don't have much more to say on that because I don't really understand operations too much. But on analytical support and decision support, of course, these are big areas, and we can look at it specifically, for example, in the context of investing. So the way I look at, the investment process as a business also, and as a practice. So there's business operations, and then there is this whole piece about idea generation. Then how do you analyze a particular idea? How do you do your portfolio construction, monitoring? There's that piece. And then there's the, the behavioral psychology for those decisions, for this whole thing. So, the best thing we can do is we can look at a few examples. For analytical support, I'll take examples from asset management, and for decision support, we'll take one example from the sell side. Okay. So let's say AI for monitoring. And, let's just, so what I was saying about an automation, for example, let's say your custodian actually is already sending you these portfolios in a way that you can automatically download into your system in a structured way instead of a PDF, right? Actually, even if you do it manually, so even if you have to do it manually, the updating your portfolio, that's fine for this example, that actually works, but it would be nice if, if it's available automatically. Now, in addition to that, you can also have an automated system that pulls out, for example, the daily price data from NSE, and it brings out the corporate announcements that are there on BSE and NSE. Right? It's easy to write a system that pulls all of this into a database. Right? So once you have that system, right, you can do the following. You can hand code some rules and say to flag exceptional events relating to securities that are in your portfolio. Because, I mean, if you start flagging events across the trading universe, there's just too much. So specifically for your portfolio, if it can start generating exceptional events, and these rules could be hand coded. So, for example, you could write a rule that flags big jumps in trading volumes, or if there is a bulk trade, could flag that, or there's a major insider transaction in the security. All of that can be flagged. Right now, it's possible that you're already doing this manually. There's somebody who looks at it on a day-to-day basis, right? But you're doing it manually. But if you have the system automatically, it could start out being, something that flags too many events. For example, maybe it's over enthusiastic. It shows you too many things that are not necessarily of interest. So what you could do, and this is where a machine learning thing comes in. So if you have a web interface, right, and it shows you a list of these alerts that it has generated, and it gives you a mechanism to say whether that alert is relevant or not. Then with time, as you say, okay, this is not useful, this is useful, that system can then begin to learn, and maybe even if it doesn't eliminate the alerts, it could start ranking them. It could start saying this is a red alert, this is an orange alert, things like that. And if enough people are curious about how this could be done in slightly more detail, you send it as a question to Srinivas, and I think he could take it up in Q&A if people are interested. Right. So, sorry, I'm getting very thirsty. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So here's another thing, right? So you can use AI for idea generation. So, what you could do, for example, is you could use something called collaborative filtering. This is actually a very old algorithm. This is something that even Amazon uses for making recommendations for, what you could buy. And, that's a pretty good analogy for what you could do with stocks as well. So let's say, you've been recording. So as your team analyzes a bunch of stocks over time, right, you could record what you like and what you don't like. Right? You keep recording this, and over time you'll have hundreds of opinions on each stock at any given point of time, whether you like them or not. Okay, that's step one. This is the unique data bit that is specific to you. Now, let's say you look at the monthly mutual fund disclosures that we get in India, or if you're in the US, you would look at the 13F disclosures. Right now, based on the things that you like or you dislike, and based on the thing that different fund managers are buying or selling. So assuming that if they increase a position, that's something they like. If they've reduced a position, that's something they don't like at any point of time. Right? You use that. You've got your own internal likes and dislikes. You could then use collaborative filtering to generate a list of new ideas. Right? So it will identify fund managers that typically like stuff that you like or dislike. And then is there something else that they've bought which you've not looked at? And it could recommend that. It could surface that and say, okay, here's the company that you might like because these 3 other fund managers have also, that are similar to you, have also liked it. So this is again classic, nothing fancy here, no deep learning, nothing is required. It's a classic machine learning algorithm that you could use, and it could actually bring a lot of value. And finally, for decision support, big caveat here. I have not worked in prime broking. I don't really know if my understanding of how things work there is exactly correct. So if I'm wrong here, if I'm saying something crazy, please write in and let me know during Q&A or even later, right? But here's the idea, and this is operationally maybe a little hard to implement, but it'll be it's really worth it. So let's say your job is to find buyers or sellers for big blocks of shares, right? Typically, the way I understand it, when a fund, for example, wants to sell a big chunk of shares, they'll call up a broker and they'll, ask them to find buyers. Now the broker will then look for potential buyers for this, right? Other funds who typically like stocks like the specific one available, and that can, in their knowledge, can buy something in that quantity. And they will also pitch the stock, and they'll explain to the funds why they should be buying it, etc. Maybe you don't pitch, it doesn't matter. In any case, let's say you start recording the details of every such offer, right? So what security was available, what was the quantity that was available, and to which funds it was offered, right? So if you offered it to 5 different funds, you record all those 5 funds, and then you also record who eventually took that deal. Right? And you start building this database. Again, this is unique to you as a prime broker. This is the unique data that you have. Right? Once you've built enough of this, what can start happening is that the next time a new block becomes available, right, you would punch in the name of the security and the quantity into the system. And the system could start surfacing and saying, okay, here are the top 3 possible buyers for this particular block of stocks based on the history that we know who tends to buy securities of this particular type in this particular size, right? So far, I think this is a specialized skill. Specific, brokers have developed a knowledge about their clients and their likes and dislikes, etc. Over time. So, but by parameterizing their clients and then recording this data, this expertise can partly become transferable and transferred to a machine, right? And of course, I mean, doesn't mean that you don't need somebody to still make that pitch to the client, etc. You still need that ability to sell a deal, but their life could become much easier, right? Because the system could surface the best possible clients. So this is an example for decision support. All right. So now that we've seen these examples, right? What are my recommendations as a firm or as a team? What could you do that what steps should you take to be able to ride this wave, right? So first is you rewire or redesign your processes to capture as much of the data as possible in as structured a way as possible. And this is true even if you don't already have the tools, right? Supposing you don't already know how to process that data, but if you can find a way to record that data, you should start doing that, right? Because over time, this will become a gold mine. For example, if you've recorded reasons for buying, not buying, rejecting a security, recorded your thoughts on every security that you've looked at over the years, right? Maybe you've got data for thousands of decisions. Sorry. So, potentially this becomes a very powerful data set in the future to understand your own biases, right? And, potentially an AI system could even, in the future, when you see a new security, it could actually look at your history of decisions and say, what, this particular decision looks a lot like what you had to take back then. This is what you had thought, and this is, whether it was a good decision or not. It could tell you that. So start recording as much of your data as you can. Second, embed technology people directly into your core functions. Even moderately sized organizations today have a separate IT team that will take care of all your infrastructure and deployments and applications. But, some maybe even build tools in-house. But, AI is in very early days today. So there aren't ready-made solutions. It's not something that you just pick off the shelf and, for this process, you're going to use this tool. So if you want to exploit the emerging technologies, you need somebody who understands your core process and also understands technology. You need these people embedded in your process. And, for example, I couldn't give an example on what to do in operations, how to use AI in operations, because I don't understand the core process. The same is true for an IT team, right? Your IT team knows the standard tools, but they don't necessarily understand the nuances of your problems. So you need people in your team who, who day in and day out work on your core process, but who understand technology. Right? So these people are hard to find right now. There aren't too many of them. But yeah, so you want them embedded in your teams. And by the way, for the young people in this, listening, this is also a hint for you. And I know Srinivas is not going to like me for saying this, but most people I hear, they are like looking to do a machine learning course. The first thing they want to do is, I want to learn Python and then I want to do machine learning. I mean, that's good. But from a practical standpoint, what's more important is to be able to build systems, right? Like I said, most organizations are not going to need to roll their own systems, right? You don't necessarily have to do TensorFlow on your own. What's more important is, can you build systems that can, plug these tools into your main workflows? So that requires, for example, are you very good with pandas? Can you process Excel files with Python very easily? Can you build a basic web application that, lets your team interact with the tools that you've built? So those are very important skills. They're much easier skills to learn also compared to machine learning. So you should do that. Third, don't get excited by all the fancy. Srinivas, can I take a minute? I just need some more water.
Yes, sure. I guess a number of questions have come up, Parijat, as take a minute. I know that you got a bad throat, I guess. I'll just go through some of the questions that have come up. There's different type of flavors that you've got. One question, anonymous attendee, she's asking what percentage of the annual return of a portfolio, if you were to do a performance attribution, how much of that could come from AI, if I understood the question right. Jane Thomas, he's asking about a specific algorithm, K-means algorithm. So it's not, Jane, I think you have said KEIMENS. It's not KEI, it's K for as in Kunte, or K as in kilo, and means, MEANS, means. K means algorithm. Okay, so that's what Parijat talked about. You can actually Google, or you can take a look online. There's lots of applications of K-means. One of the application could be that you simply wanted to, for example, you get mutual fund data on at least in India, you get mutual fund data on the AMFI website. You could take the NAV data and try to find out clustering in between mutual fund portfolios, right, or mutual fund schemes. So which schemes are like each other? Although schemes might be saying that I am doing this or I am doing that, this is my investment thesis, but their actual NAV may have a different footprint. So you would be able to cluster footprints and find out what is happening, which mutual funds are looking like brothers and sisters, and which mutual funds are like distant cousins. Carrie Raditz, she's asking, it would be useful to to illustrate through some examples. I think Parijat has already illustrated a few examples. We'll talk through a few more examples in the Q&A as we go through. An anonymous attendee, he's or she's mentioned, can you name the service again for transcription? There are lots of services for transcription, but I would let Parijat answer it. If I understood it right, like if you go to even Google, right, or Amazon, you can do some transcription on your own if you were able to write Python code, but Google and Amazon will start charging you if you wanted to do it at scale. So suppose if you wanted to transcript 1 hour of audio into a transcript, you will have to pay Amazon and or Google or Microsoft, to send them the audio or video bytes, and in return they will give you a transcripted version of what they thought it is. Transcription doesn't work that very well because it's also dependent on accent and so on. If anybody has taken a Coursera course here will understand, sometimes it will misspell things, but it's about 70 to 80% right. Sunil, Parijat, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm actually taking down this thing, and then I'll just
yeah.
This is actually my last slide, anyways.
Okay, go on. Yeah, why don't you finish the slide? And there's lots of questions coming up now. People are getting warmed up.
Okay. All right. So I'll just so I said embed, rewire processes, embed technology people into your core functions. This is very important. This is hard to do, but it's very important. Third is, don't get excited about fancy AI tools. There are lots of new stuff, and you'll get, videos being shared about fancy stuff. You don't need to get excited about everything. You have to focus on your process and try to identify where AI could have the biggest impact for you, right? I mean, even if you have technology people in your team, right, their bandwidth is going to be limited. Your team's ability to adapt to new ways of doing things is going to be limited. You want to use that bandwidth in the most effective way, right? You want to spend those limited resources for the highest impact. So focus on your process, find out what your biggest pain points are, and then look for tools to solve those. Instead of just saying, hey, this is an interesting piece of AI, let me see where I can force fit it into my process. You don't do that. The fourth point, of course, this is something I've been saying throughout. Don't try to build everything on your own. It might be heroic, but it's ultimately pointless, right? Shamelessly use third-party tools and services where possible. Focus on where you have an edge. And finally, this is big. I think, we keep looking for free tools. There are a lot of free tools. But if you're an organization that you are trying to make money by doing this, be prepared to spend money, right? So for example, in the 70s, I think, most bond traders used to trade bonds on the current yield. Okay. And then some savvy bond traders, they figured out if you use spreadsheets, it's possible to do yield to maturity calculations on, dozens or hundreds of securities. And so they started doing that and they got a massive edge, right? They made a killing. Now sitting here today, we'll be like, wow, that was easy money, right? All you had to do was put a YTM formula into a spreadsheet and that's it. And you basically just took everybody's money. But think about it back then. Compute power was incredibly expensive. Very few people actually knew how to operate a computer or spreadsheets, right? Computers were this, and the young people here may not even remember such a time, but computers were actually kept in these separate air-conditioned rooms. And, like temples, you had to leave your shoes outside. And so, so as an organization, you would have had to invest money in that compute power, in those people, in that infrastructure. And you spent a lot of money. So, I mean, they made heavy investments to get that edge. There's no reason why it's going to be cheap today, right? So be prepared to spend money for the good tools. Yeah, that's largely what I had to say on this.
So this is great, Parijat. So there's lots of questions on the hopper. I wanted to just start getting warmed up. I'm going to extend the webinar, if you don't mind, by a few more minutes because we are nearing 6:30. What is the most exciting AI application you have seen in investment? If you can give 2-3 examples, you've already given some ideas. One Excel example as well.
So for me, the ability to, and this is obviously a third-party service. This is the table stakes thing, but the ability to actually just ask a question. So the Sentio thing that I mentioned.
Yes.
Where you can just say, okay, what did Google say about their Pixel phones in their last conference call? Right? If I'm just able to punch that question in and it comes back with a paragraph of an answer right from their transcript, I think that's phenomenally powerful because that's the way you think about things. You don't want to read an entire transcript. You're thinking about a particular idea and then, or even better, which companies actually said that the coronavirus turned out to be a positive for them.
Fantastic. Okay.
Those kind of things. Yeah, that's very exciting.
Right. So you mentioned about lots of like as a building block, right? You're saying that people should first of all learn our basic automation. How should one? Is that right? Is my understanding right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So how should they go about doing this? Many of more I would say about 50% of those who are attending, they are charter holders, and the rest are either level 1, level 2, or even level 3 pass outs. So what is your advice to them? And with not enough technology background, so how should they be going about understanding the basics? Like people understand Excel, I guess.
Yeah, so that's a great place to start, right? So if, for example, if you ever written a VBA code in Excel, you're already in a very good place. But you just what you want to do is whatever routine task you do, right? If you are, so for example, a lot of people might be, every day you have to generate some sort of reports. Try doing that in Python, right? That's the best way to learn, not these big courses. You take something that you do every day and try and figure out that instead of spending the 20 minutes you do to generate an Excel, can you write code? Maybe you spend 18 hours trying to build it, but once you've built it, it's a 1-minute job every day, right? So that's something that keeps you motivated instead of contrived examples. If it's a real problem that you do every day and you try to automate it using Python or Pandas or whatever, that's the best way to get a feel for how do you build systems like that.
Right. So you mentioned a lot about third-party tools. How do you keep abreast of all the evolving changes that are happening in the AI world? And before I go to that, there was a pointed question. We already have statistics on numbers on how much computers, the volume of trade that computers account for. on the exchange. It's more than 50%, right? So, but it's not necessary that that is all AI driven trade. It could be simple automation trade. What part of the returns that are generated you think are being attributed to AI? Is that attribution at all possible?
So if you look at it industry wide, I doubt it, right? Because there's a huge variation,
Yes.
right? So for example, if Citadel is doing market making and they're using some kind of AI systems, then for them, maybe most of it is actually coming from AI, or from high frequency trading firms. Most of it would be coming from there. On the other hand, a discretionary asset manager, right, like a mutual fund, maybe just by the fact that they use a smart execution algorithm, they maybe add 10 bips or 10 bips. If they're lucky, they add 10 bips to their overall return, right? So it varies a lot across the industry.
So can you give a glimpse to people about Tower Research, their trailblazing performance? Is it still true, or is it has it faltered?
No. It's, so far as I know, so they are very secretive. There are very secretive firms. All high frequency firms are extremely secretive. But as far as I can tell, they're very much in the game even now.
So Jim Simons, there's a book called "The Man Who Knew Everything or Solved the Markets," I think.
Solve the market.
Yeah, who solved the market. So I think they have not faltered, right? They've given I think more than 10% returns, annualized returns every single year. Is that right? Or so what do you think they use AI, or what, or do they use simple automation?
So that's the thing, right? So AI is such a broad term. You know, some people, if you are using very fancy statistical analysis, for example, is that AI? It's, if your system adapts to new data every week, would you say that's AI, or is that just statistics? Right? That's really the problem here. Do they use neural networks? I doubt it. But do they use very fancy statistical learning techniques? I'm very sure they do.
So there's lots of questions coming on this particular vein of thinking or genre of thinking. I'm a beginner in AI. What are the free tools that I can use, on the internet, or even paid tools where I can start using or harnessing the AI power? I'm an investor, but I'm a novice in this technology world. So, any advice there, Parijat?
Free is, I mean, if it's really good, see, either you're going to have to learn how to code. So TensorFlow as a library is free, right?
Google is also free. Google is also free.
Yeah, I mean, so the libraries are there, but then it's really a trade-off between how much you are willing to spend time learning how to use TensorFlow to build your tools versus how quickly you want to get results, right? The faster you want to start getting results, you'll have to shell out some money. But having said that, it's still fairly cheap given the kind of output you can get. So like I mentioned, Amazon SageMaker, right? It's not terribly expensive. But if your use case is that you are managing a very small amount of money, so the incremental edge that you're going to get probably will not merit, buying an expensive system. So then, I mean, really, it becomes a business decision. If you're a youngster who's trying to learn, then Amazon has I think a fairly decent free tier usage where you can play with things.
So how do you, Parijat, in terms of like careers, right? So are we AI ready? I'm not very sure if we are AI ready in the sense that, as a profession, if people, at least in India, if you're using AI, not just India, everywhere else in the world, we are as AI ready as, let's say, Amazon. Do you agree with that, or online selling?
No, absolutely, I agree. Especially on the buy side, and I doubt the sell side is much better. I mean, we've barely even scratched what simple analytics can do. Forget AI. I think we are way behind the curve.
Right. So does that mean there's an opportunity to actually, for people to not just generate alpha, but also find out, create these third-party tools which others can use?
Oh yes, absolutely. There is an opportunity there. Just that as a business idea, you have to remember that. So it's obviously very useful. It's just that you have you would have to find clients that are managing large AUMs, right? That's something that's very important. I mean, these tools, if you want to get paid, you want to sell it to the biggest AUM funds. And that's typically, I mean, so the US, for example, has much larger funds. So even if you're here in India developing a system, make sure you don't do it only for the Indian fund managers. Build something that's general enough that you would sell to the large international funds.
Right. Do I understand it right, Parijat, that you've you have at least one or two companies of your own? You're an entrepreneur. So in one line or in two lines, if you can share what were the pain points when you started young and you actually created these companies.
Yeah. So one is, now I don't run these companies anymore. Now, of course, I work for an asset manager, but I did. So I'll tell you some of the few learnings that I've had. And this is, I think, very off track, honestly, compared to AI. But the important thing is, I as an engineer, I was very focused on building the technology and building.
These are automation, basic automation companies, right? So in that sense, they're connected with the world of AI, right?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, in that sense. So the thing is, if you want to start a company, you have to be less worried about the technology itself. It's a very important part. But before you go about building the tool, you want to figure out the market. You want to figure out the demand. You want to see, if there are people willing to pay for that in a large enough amount. The total addressable market, things like that. That becomes, if you're an engineer, right, you're always very excited about building exciting tools. But you should not lose sight of the fact that your buyer may not care about how you're achieving those results. Right? They care about the results. So make sure you are focused on getting that delivered, understanding your customer's pain point.
Right. So the median audience here, Parijat, is again, a young charter holder who's wanting to learn more about AI, non-technical person. What are the few websites she should go and check out? A couple of books, if you can recommend for people to read.
So the one website that I tell everybody to start your journey on is Kaggle, Kaggle, Kaggle.com. This is probably the biggest AI community today, and got recently bought over by Google. So in fact, they provide a lot of compute, etc. So you can test machine learning algorithms on their
data sets,
and they have the data sets as well. And there's a community, so you can discuss and people can guide you. So that's a fairly good thing. In terms of books, I think better than books, if you want to study AI, better do Jeffrey Hinton's course, or you do CS229 with Andrew on, those courses, and get your hands dirty. That's the most important thing. Just start building and do that on Kaggle, do that on your own machine, install Python, get going.
Right.
That's the way to do it.
Fantastic. So on that note, Parijat, to get our hands dirty and to start, making not just oneself AI ready, but the industry AI ready, which seems to be a big opportunity there. Thank you so much for taking time out. I do realize that you've had to go to Delhi. There were some issues. I hope everybody is good at home. And I thank you again on behalf of everybody and CFA Institute for taking time out and creating this presentation. Thank you all for listening in today. And if you have got suggestions, if you can, of speakers, etc., please do send it to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter, or many of you know my email address as well. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Srinivas. It was great being here.
Thanks, Parijat.
Copyright 2020. All rights reserved. This program is designed to give accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is distributed with the understanding that CFA Institute is not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, tax, investment, or other expert advice. If legal advice or other expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought.